So is it snowing a lot where you guys are at?
Kinda. I mean, I guess it would depend where we are in the city, but it's kind of snowing out this way. Why are you not in Syracuse?
No, I am. I haven't been outside because I work from home today. But I can hear the snow trucks.
I was gonna say you could always look out a window, but looks like you just did.
No, I did it. It looked like it wasn't, so I'm like, why are there snow trucks? Anyways, yeah, that I was like, oh, maybe it's not snowing that bad. Maybe it is.
Yeah, it's been on and off. I don't think it's as bad as forecasters have been expecting, but it's better than nothing, or better than a lot, I should say.
Yeah, yeah.
Start recording and then share my screen. Okay, cool. So I don't know if anyone saw, but I think it was Schneider posted a something in the students channel, this document, REST API Design Best Practices Handbook. And I saw this and it made me laugh because this is kind of what we're talking about today. So if anything I say maybe is not all that helpful or you want a different perspective on things, I suspect this might be a good resource to go to throughout the class. But we're going to be talking today about this thing called REST API design, or REST APIs in general. And I want to sort of define, I've used sort of these terms like website and web API kind of freeform, like interchangeably throughout this class, but now we're going to start to differentiate a little bit. So what both things are powered by web servers. They both sort of are things that sort of you can make requests to and get back responses. Websites, though, tend to be for humans. So a website will often give you back HTML and will be a page you're sort of rendering in your web browser and interacting with. A web API will give you back data in some sort of machine readable format like JSON, or there's other ones like XML or some other protocols that are familiar there. But for our case, pretty much going to be JSON. So any sort of like web application you use regularly is probably sort of a form of like a website or a web application. I'll kind of use those interchangeably too. Think like google.com or like this slides program here, or like Facebook, or I don't know, things like that. Web APIs, though, like those are like all the queries and code ML endpoints we've been using so far. Those are sort of meant for computers to interact with. The New York Times API that you're going to be using for your homework assignment is a great example. Also, the GitHub API we're going to be using later today is another great example. So I want to call it out because what we're going to be talking about today is largely web APIs and not websites. So all the sort of conventions are like that we're going to be talking about are made to make it easier for computers to understand sort of what's going on. And I guess sort of in consequence, like the programmers, because sort of the specifications defined there so people can sort of understand what's going on. But we're going to be talking about web APIs. And I should also define like, what does API mean? Because I'm using that term too. API stands for Application Programming Interface. I'm not sure if Max has sort of covered this term with you before, but it's sort of a set of functions or procedures or commands you can use to access something else. And I'm being very vague with that definition because it is sort of a very large category of things. So like an example of an API in JavaScript, there's that document.getElementById function. And when you call that function, you get back data from the web page. You get back sort of an element that you can interact with. That's an example of an API. It's an interface that your application can use to access data from somewhere else. So in this case, it's like your JavaScript can access the HTML page. another example of an API, in particular, like a web API, sort of like a subtype of an API, would be like the careersandcode.ml site, or the New York Times API, which you're going to use later today, or GitHub's API, or like these are web APIs. But behind the scenes, an API is a mechanism for querying something else. Like it doesn't have to be a web thing. It could be JavaScript, or it could be, it could be something else. So web APIs, though, like they're kind of weird. Like it's a weird subgenre of an API. So why do these come about? Well, if you have a web browser and you want to use that to interact with some external application, like you want to query some sort of service out there on the internet somewhere. We talked before in one of the first classes, the only language the web browser knows how to speak is HTTP. So if you want to interact with something else, it's got to be over HTTP. That's really your only option. So like the web wasn't really built to be for web APIs. It was built for like websites. It was built as a way where, as a human user, you can make a request via a browser to get like a document, to get sort of like a thing you can review, a web page that you can look at, you can see information. It wasn't really meant for like machine-to-machine communication originally. But with time, sort of this became an important thing that people wanted to do. So they sort of like stuck it on top of HTTP. They were like, well, we could use this for machine-to-machine communication. There's no reason we can't. Like the protocol supports it, just wasn't its original use. So that's why like it's an HTTP-based thing, is because like it's the only language the web browser speaks. But like as people sort of evolved that approach, like they sort of came up with different ways that could make their machine APIs work. So like some people were like, okay, I'm going to make it work exactly like the old school web stuff worked. And you just have GET requests and POST requests. And anytime you want to like get data from someone, you make a GET request, and someone being like another computer. And anytime you want to update data on another system, you make a POST request, and that worked. And other people were like, I don't like that. I want to sort of break things down a bit more. Other people were like, maybe I want to structure my paths differently. Like if you want to get like user information, is that /user/user/user list? Like there's lots of different ways you can sort of think about structuring these paths. None of those are wrong. Like they all work. It's just if you don't have a standard, then it's all over the place. And sort of as a programmer, you sort of have to like, you can't really make assumptions. You have to sort of like every single time make sure you have all the characters exactly right and stuff like that. And like data types too, like sending JSON in the body is something else. Like there's a lot of sort of decisions as one sort of writing an API, which you'll get to later, but also sort of decisions that affect one who's consuming the API, what we're doing today. And we're going to talk about a standard that's come about that people tend to use in writing web APIs to sort of come up with answers to all these questions. So you have a set of standards that you can sort of tend to follow. And that's called REST. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer, which sort of makes sense in an abstract way as we start to talk about this more, but is not all that helpful of an acronym, to be honest. But it's sort of a lot of these standards. And there are other sets of standards. REST, though, is probably for the past, let's say, 5 to 10 years, been the one that's been the most sort of well used and understood and that people have followed. So these are like best practices. They're not rules. So what you're going to find is we're going to talk about all these. And then you're going to go off and you're going to look at some APIs, web APIs that exist out there. And you're going to be like, this doesn't follow those rules. And you're going to come back to me and be like, what do you didn't, we talked about this in class. This should follow these rules. And I'm going to say, yeah, but people don't always follow these rules. Like these are best practices and often serve as a good guide to allow you to sort of guess or like try to figure out what an API surface area is. You're going to run into like things that don't match this though. The most important thing in REST is this concept of a resource. You can think of like a resource as like the subject or like the key noun that you're sort of performing an action on. So like maybe like a car dealership that give you like a car resource, a customer resource, a salesperson resource. All these resources are like things that the API is managing. And these things somehow like relate to each other. They have connections. And a big part of REST is sort of allowing you to query information from each of these resources. And a lot of what you do in web applications is sort of like a derivative of something like information management. And some people really don't like that term, but I mean, behind the scenes, a lot of software is like storing data and managing data. And that's where REST really excels. When you have sort of like things like lists of, or like a table of data, and you sort of need to do things like modify cells in that table, or modify rows, or add rows, or remove rows, or add new columns, like all these sort of operations. Resources are generally always nouns. I say generally because these rules can be broken, but you'll tend to see them be nouns. Now, so we've got nouns. There's also kind of like the verb, like the thing we're doing, sort of the operation we're performing to somehow modify that table. And there are 4 main ones, and they have a nice acronym called CRUD: create, read, update, and delete. So imagine you sort of stick one of these words in front of a resource: create a car, read a car, update a car, delete a car. You can sort of see, like, if you think through it in your head, these are kind of like all the core operations you've got to be able to complete to sort of edit that table in any way you want. If you can add new rows, read rows, update rows, and delete rows, you can sort of take a table in any sort of state and like modify it through a series of these operations to get to sort of whatever other state you want. And that's the idea behind REST. The way they've sort of decided to break things down is with these sort of core operations. And to sort of manage and modify your data, you perform these operations. And this sort of level of abstraction allows you as the client to communicate to the server what you'd like to do, but the client to remain generic enough where it's not doing like lots of sort of complicated, very domain-specific things. So how do these sort of look? Well, it tends to be that CRUD operations creates are like usually use the method post. So it would be like post / in the name of the resource, so like post cars. I also want to call it the resources plural. That's another big thing in REST. So if you want to create a new car, you would make a request to post cars and include the car data in the body, and then it would give you back a new car. If you want to read a car, you can either make a get to that same thing, so a get the /cars, and it'll give you a list of all the cars, or you can make a get to /cars / an identifier for the car. We'll talk about what that is in a second, to get one particular row of that table or one particular car. To do an update, you use this other method we haven't talked too much about called put, but it's just like get or post, similar sort of idea. It's just a different one on the list, another one to use. And when you put a resource, you can update a row. So put /cars / its identifier will allow you to update one of the rows in sort of the table. And delete uses the delete method, another new method. And the delete method will allow you to delete a row from the table. So you'll notice that all of the operations that work on a row have that identifier for car thing. And all of them that are sort of like for the whole table don't have that. Like they just are /cars. And that's very purposeful. With REST, you tend to have those two sort of variants. You have sort of like /resource and then /resource /ID. And that's sort of how you end up querying a resource. You sort of have those two routes, and the method you use sort of that variation determines which operation you're using. Oh yeah, there's more methods just get and post. So we've got one for each CRUD operation. And they're one-to-one too. So like a post means create, a get means read, a put means update, and a delete means delete. Like you're never going to sort of have a mixture of them, like where they sort of delete means like two things. Again, I say never, but like you shouldn't ever. But maybe your API doesn't follow the protocol and just does whatever it wants. So let's walk through a few of these. Wow, what a tongue twister. This is what a create looks like. And we're going to do all this in a second. So we're going to do some practice. So get a chance to do this on your own. But we're just going to run through them all first before we do that. So A create is a post to the slash resource and it's plural. So this is sort of what the raw request looks like. A post to slash cars. I included some headers, sort of a content type and accept because I'm dealing with JSON, and I just wanted to do that because it's a good idea to include content type and accept headers when you're making requests. And my car seems to have two properties, company and model name. And the company is Pontiac and the model name is Vibe. And I send this JSON, and then in the response, I get back this thing. I get back a 201. So that's another thing with creates. Normally you get back a 201, which means created, not just a 200, but sort of not always the case, but tends to be what you get. And I get back 3 fields, the same thing I sent, but also this new ID field here. So if you were to make this request, and we will make something similar to this again, you'd be making a new row in that table. But this ID field, this is sort of, think of this as like another column in that table that allows you to sort of target an individual row. So every row in that sort of metaphorical table here has a different value in that ID column, and they're guaranteed to be unique, and that's really important. What that means is if you want to like target one row in a future request, you can use that ID to target it. So it tends to be this ID value is a really important value to keep around. It's like a value that you want to sort of store so that if you want to change that row in the future, you have the ability to. If you don't store that ID, you have to either query for it again with another mechanism, which we'll show in a second with reading, or you have to make a new one. Like you've sort of lost a reference to that. You can't get that back without querying the API again. So with reading, with this, I'm doing get/cars. This sort of gives me a sort of a view of the whole table. And you see here, I get back a 200, and I've got an array of objects. So remember yesterday how I talked about it's a pretty common format? Well, the array of objects thing, you're going to see in REST a lot, like a lot. It's all over the place. And any sort of these endpoints that are sort of like returning a list of entries in that table will use an array of objects, or tends to use an array of objects. So in this case, I'm assuming I'm making these requests sort of in order. So I'm making this request after I make that first create request, that first post cars. If I make it now, I sort of have data in my table. I've got a row in there. So I've got that ID, the company, the model, those sort of match with what I did before. So that's pretty cool. Let's talk about updating now. So this is the first one where we've got that ID in the path. And you'll see that this value here, 945B6, that matches this, 945B6. They sort of line up. So in this post request, or this, put request here for updating, I'm targeting that particular row. And what I'm doing is I'm changing the company column or the company value in there to be Ford, not Pontiac anymore. And in the response back from that request, I get a 200, and I get sort of the current value of that row. This is sort of how it tends to work with REST. You sort of tend to get back, whenever you make a request in the response, you get back like the current value of the thing you just modified, which is really, really helpful. But in this case, I've now sort of modified that row in the table. I now have a company of Ford instead of a company of Pontiac. And then for deleting, it's very similar to put in sort of the URL structure. So this is you're removing a row from the table, and you've got that ID column. That's sort of how you're targeting which row you're removing. And with this, you get back a 204, not a 200. It's a 204 no content, tends to be. But this is another one of those things where it sort of deviates based on the API. But 204 no content is just a status code that means like everything went great, we just don't have anything to send you, so the body's empty. So in this case, we sort of removed that car row from the table. So in these sort of 4 requests, we've sort of done sort of every possible like pure CRUD REST thing. We've created a row, we've read the table, we've updated a row, and we've deleted a row. So why do we want to follow these rules? Kind of hinted at it before, but predictability, like being able to understand exactly the API surface area and how things work is really important. And we're going to go, like, I'm going to show you some documentation on some APIs a little bit later today, and we're going to be going through that. And like, that's great. Like documentation on how this stuff works is helpful, but what's even better than documentation is if it just follows a convention you understand already. So you can sort of come up with this API and see something like this API is a resource called, let's say, spaces. And like, you don't even have to know what a space is, but you just know, oh, it's a REST API. Okay, cool. So I can make a get request to slash spaces and get a list of all of them. I can make a new space by making a request to post slash spaces. I can update one by doing a put to slash spaces slash ID and delete it with delete spaces ID, and so on and so forth. So the predictability REST gives you is really, really nice. But as I mentioned, not everything always follows these rules. And probably the thing that breaks from these rules most often is that not everything you want to do with a resource very cleanly fits into that CRUD paradigm. So let's go back to that car example. So what if I want to like somehow model like an API endpoint where like I want to sell a car? Like somehow I want to be like, I want to say a car was sold. I could maybe somehow do like make that like an update somehow. Maybe it would kind of fit with that, but maybe I'm have another way I can like update a car already and I can change the metadata in the car. I don't want to like override that for selling. When you get to these sort of situations where you have like these sort of things you want to do that you can't really model all that well with REST or don't fit into like those CRUD actions, it tends to be people just sort of make something up. Like to me, maybe a good way to model it could be like post slash cars slash the ID of the car slash sell. And like, if I make a request to that, it means that I want to sell the car. And it kind of works, I guess, but like, it's very arbitrary. And in general, like this is where documentation is important, because while REST will get you pretty far with some of the basic stuff, there's always going to be edge cases. There's always going to be things that REST doesn't fit with anything of sufficient complexity. So like, this is sort of an example of like a situation like that. Actually, before I move on to nested resources, any questions? Or Trell?
Yeah, I don't know if it's super important right now, but the ID that was returned on the create, what does that signify again?
Yeah, so think of it like a randomly generated value that is unique to each row in the table, or unique to each row sort of in the list. And what that allows you to do is to target a row. So you can sort of say to me, I would like to operate on row. Let's for a second assume it's not like a random letter or number string, it's just like a number. So you've got like a row number 1, row number 2, or number 3. And I could say, I would like to update row number 1. And that number 1 is sort of acting like the identifier, or in short, the ID for that row.
But with that ID, I could target any one of the rows?
Any one of the rows. So each row has its own ID.
Okay, but we're just showing one of the rows. I mean, excuse me,
Yes.
just one of the IDs.
Yes. Well, let me go back over to this example here. Let me add another row to this. So if I wanted to sort of assume there was like another row in this table, I might have something where like something like this, where I have like Ford F-150 maybe. So now each of these ID values are different. And if I want to update this first row, I can make a request to this ID. So I can make like a put slash cars slash that ID. Or if I want to make a request to the second one, I can make a request to put slash cars slash this ID.
Okay, so the first example, Pontiac and Vibe are still in the same row. They're not
Yes.
different rows, even though I'm
Yes.
physically looking at it in a different row, but it's
Yeah.
got it.
So the array represents, each item in the array represents a row, and every object, every like key value pair represents a column in that row. That tends to be how it works with REST.
Okay, different column, but still one. Okay, now
Yep.
I'm good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Glad I was able to clear that up. Oh, okay. Cool. So I keep moving on here. There's also what is called a nested resource. So think about this. Think about you want to like get all the owners of a car over time. That's kind of like a resource. It's like a table, like sort of like almost like a filtered table. It's like a list of sort of like users or owner or people that's been like filtered by those who have owned that particular car in the past. So one way in REST you can represent that query, and there's a few ways. But one way is you could have a nested resource inside of cars. So something like this, I could say like, let's say I made like a get to this, like get/cars car ID owners. That could give me back a list of all the people who have owned that car in the past. And I could do sort of owner's ID, sort of that pattern of like the thing after that is the ID to sort of get to target that particular one. And I could get like that particular owner, or I could make like a post to this. I'm going to make a post to this. I could create a new owner for the car, a new user sort of in that table, or a new person in that table. And that might have some sort of association with the car, sort of by the nature of it being, by the nature of that being like associated with the car's resource. This is a bit more of an advanced concept, and we're not going to deal with this today, but I really just wanted to expose you to that this is a possible thing, that it's a thing that happens on occasion. So speaking of filtering, so we've talked about sort of the core REST operations, but there are other things you sometimes might want to do when you're accessing data. One of the more common ones is if I have a big list, like a big table, sort of a big like get/whatever endpoint that's like a resource that I'm requesting, and I want to get sort of a subset of that data. I want to filter it. Think about maybe like I've got a column in that table, or like a value in that that data that's in each row, and I want to filter it where like all the people who are named Ryan. I'm assuming there's like a name column in this table. What I sort of want to do is I want to like tell the server only give me back the rows that match these filtering parameters. And this is pretty common. I mean, you could think about like in probably a lot of web tools you've used, there's a lot of sort of like tables of data or something tabular-ish like, and you have some sort of way you can filter that data. In REST, you tend to use query parameters for this. So we haven't talked too much about query parameters. I think I have here we go. So again, we talked about them very briefly earlier on in the class, but there's going to start to become more of a thing now today. But it tends to be that if you want to filter data with REST, you use them. And the way it's structured, it sort of starts with a question mark. You have the name of the parameter, an equal, and then the value of the parameter, and then an ampersand. So it's sort of like the weird part is it's like the question mark starts it, and then the ampersand's in between all of the bits that are sort of the parameters there. It's kind of a bit of a goofy format, but it's sort of what's been used and what's been standardized on, so we kind of got to go with it here. But why this tends to be used for different types of filters. So an example here is like, let's say I had like a search box at the top of my table, and I type some search text in that text box. And then I want to sort of filter that list based off of that search text I typed. I could make a request to my endpoint and include a search, for example, query parameter that is equal to that text in the search box. And that could be a thing that could filter that REST list, or that resource list. And like I say could here because the server's got to implement it. Like it's not like there's just a by default list of filters that everything implements, unfortunately. But this is sort of the way that it tends to work. So if you are working with a REST API, here we go. If you're working with a REST API and you're like, I want to get back a list of data, but I actually want sort of a subset of that list, then look through to find any filters in your documentation. Or that term filter is a good one. And they're probably going to be query parameters, and there's probably going to be some sort of documentation on them if they've been built out for you. So we're going to do an example of some filtering. This is sort of our first sort of real REST example here. So I have on my careers.code.ml server, I've set up a user's resource. I'll open up Postman here. And I'll put this in Slack, so you folks are welcome to follow along if you'd like. I'm going to make a request to this endpoint. I'm going to make a GET request. So this is actually, before I do this, I'm going to just start with /users. Okay. Okay. So if you make a request to this endpoint, something like Postman, you're going to get back a bunch of data on some fictitious people. There's a bunch of got sort of an array of objects, and you sort of have a bunch of sort of data in here. And this is all like completely fake, that I've generated sort of through some tools that make fake data. So none of this is of actual like real people or anything. But this here, this is sort of an example of a list of resources, or a list of items, like a sort of a dump of that whole table effectively you can get via REST API. So let's say I'm looking through here. I notice that there's like a city field. So city Lafayette, city Buffalo. Oh, hey, Buffalo. City Toledo. They're all sort of different things. Woodland Hills. I wonder where that is. Let's say I only want to get all the users that live in Philadelphia. I want to get like a shortened version of that. And why I'm picking Philadelphia is because it's the example I used in my thing here, so I know it's going to work. But if I do question mark city equals Philadelphia. Oh, and I spell Philadelphia right. Now you'll notice that I've got a much shorter list here. I've only got a list of 2 people. And you can see that in each of these cases, I go to city, wherever city is. There we go, city, Philadelphia. City, Philadelphia. So it usually tends to be, but this is not a rule, it's just sort of like, it usually tends to be that the filter parameter is the same thing as the field you're filtering by. So if you're using a REST API, this is like a cool trick. You can try this out, and sometimes it'll work, and sometimes it won't, but it's helpful sometimes. I think actually I may have implemented all these as filters. Let's give that a shot. If I try like state PA, yeah, I did. Very nice. So, oh, no, I didn't. I only did city. Never mind. Yeah, so you can see there, like I tried a filter for state and that didn't work. It gave me back a big list of data. It gave me back some that weren't in Pennsylvania. So yeah, I mean, it's not going to work for every possible thing, but it's the good thing is the documentation we're going to talk about later for APIs will sort of cover the sort of filters that exist for each resource. Anyway. The second thing we're going to talk about here, actually, I should also say before we get into this, any questions on that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
okay, I don't know if I was muted or not, but my question is, how do you know what what are the different types of names of parameters? So is it just search or is there other parameters as well?
It's very flexible. So it's one of those
Okay.
things where depending on the API, they're going to implement different ones.
Okay.
And I'm more bringing it up because it's the way you tend to filter. It's like the common way you go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But the exact filters that a certain API will allow you to use sort of varies depending on who wrote it and what they sort of valued and when they wrote it.
Okay. So how would you determine which one?
Documentation.
If it's based a documentation. Okay.
Yeah. So we're gonna sort of we're gonna go through this in probably about like half an hour or so. We're gonna start to run through some real APIs and show you what some real API documentation looks like. And there's going to be like a section where it's going to be like filters, and it's going to say these are the ones you can use.
Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's not a standard set.
Okay, that answers my question.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yep. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is receiving a really long list. So let's do a bit of a thought experiment here. Imagine you wanted to get a list of all transactions that were made at Wegmans yesterday across every Wegmans store. That's a lot of data, like a lot of data. Like, think about how many Wegmans stores there are and how many transactions they handle. Like, that's got to be like multiple a second easily. So, like, what is there? Like 3,600 seconds in a day or something like that. 300, let's see. I might have that wrong. Whatever. Let me just look it up here. Seconds in a day. I think it's 3,600. No, it's not. This number. Yeah, 3,600 is another thing. But like, take this and like be like, okay, well, let's assume maybe like there were like 5 transactions a second. That's a lot of rows in an array in JSON. Like, if you wanted to think about just sort of like how many characters it takes to represent all that data that we've been sending. Like the city's example, or the user's example we just talked about, like just to send like 2 users, that was probably like, give or take 1,000 characters, maybe like 800 characters or something like that. So like if I just sort of give you, say like, okay, let's assume like every transaction's like 300 characters. Like that's a lot of characters. And if I just sort of like very roughly do the math and I'm like, take that bytes to megabytes, like 129 megabytes, that's like, that's a tenth of a gigabyte you're requesting. And I don't know how much you all know about sort of sizes for computer files. Like that's solidly large. Like that's going to take some time. That's not a request that you could sort of make and get back in like half a second. Like that's at least a multi-second thing on a good internet connection, probably more like 10 or 15 seconds, to be honest. So generally doing something like that is not really a viable strategy. Like it doesn't really make sense to request all that data in one go. So the folks who thought through REST came up with this pattern called paging. What you do with paging is it sort of solves this problem of sending a lot of data. You split your data up into chunks or sections, and you tell the server how big each section is. And what it will do is it will sort of request a given section for you for the query you're making. So let's sort of give an example here. Like, let's say you want to fetch the first like 10 transactions in that big Wegmans transaction list. So what you can do is you tell the server my page size is 10, and I want page 1. And what the server will do is it will give you back transaction 0 to 9, or 1 to 10, or index 0 to 9, or however you want to take it into account. But it'll give you that first 10 of those transactions. And you say, okay, cool. And then you make another request. You say, I'd like to have page 2 with my page size of 10. And that will give you transaction 10 to 20, or I guess 11 to 20. And page size 3 will be 21 to 30, and so on and so forth. You can sort of keep going until you reach the end. And what this does is it means by splitting this up into smaller requests, you're able to do things like gradually load in the data you want, which makes sort of for better user experiences often. But also it means when you're requesting this data, the data you're getting back is in smaller, more manageable chunks. That's good for both you as someone writing the client software, what's running in the web browser, because trying to load multi-gigabytes of text into memory is not going to be fast or fun for you. And it also makes it for the server author nice because they don't have to store and manage multi-gigabyte responses to your requests. So there's a pretty common workflow with paging that you do where sort of you make a request. So when you have like a resource that pages, and for sort of that like that table, that get/resource path, what you'll do is you make a request for page 1. You get that back, and you check to see if that page is a full page. In other words, if the number of items in your page is the number of items you requested. So if our page size was 10, you check to see if there's 10 items in that array you got back from the server. And if it is, then there's probably another page. So you make a request to get another page. Make a request to get page 2. And you sort of keep on doing this. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down until you get to the very end of your table. And when you get to the end, you're sort of like, that final page is going to be a partial page, or it's going to be a page that has nothing in it or something like that, but it's not going to have 10 elements. And once you get to the very end, you know, oh, I'm done. I have the whole thing. But you might also decide, oh, actually, I only need to get the first page or the first couple pages, and you can sort of stop. It sort of gives you the flexibility to fetch whatever subset of the data you'd like. And you can also filter and page at the same time, because no reason you can't do that. So you could be like, give me all users who live in Philadelphia, page 1 of that, page 2 of that, page 3 of that, so on and so forth. And if the server is built correctly with sort of following a lot of these REST principles, it should work to do that. And it's funny to bring this up because I have a great example here that's sort of exactly what I just said. So if I take this here, I make a request here to queries encode that email slicers $page equals 1. What this will do is it'll sort of fetch the first page of data. Now, it tends to be the way you specify the page parameter, like the way you specify which page you want to request is with the query parameter, and it's usually called page. But again, this is sort of one of those things where it's going to depend on the API. There's going to be documentation that's going to tell you how this works. But this concept of paging is something you're going to see all over the place. So if I make a request to this, you can see sort of I have this JSON structure. I sort of skipped over the top here, but this is sort of like a header that's telling you a little bit about the page data you're getting back. So it looks like there are 50 entries in this entire list of users. So there's 50 rows in our big user table. This is page 1. It looks like there's a next page that's sort of available. So there's a page after this page. If we sort of go through this data array here, I'm just going to collapse all these to show you. I think there's, if I remember right, 10 entries in here. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we've got 10 entries in here. So that means that we're sort of seeing rows 0 to 9, or I guess row 1 to 10, however you wanted to count it. We're sort of seeing those first 10 rows. If we then go page equals 2 and hit enter, we'll see the next couple. Now I'm going to sort of prove this to you by saying the first row in this has a surname of McQueen. So when I make this request now, the next one, this is sort of the surname of Sturgis. So this is sort of the 11th row in the table, or the next item in that, the first item in that next page. And if I go to 3, it'll change again. So now it's Adams, and 4, Ford, and 5, Plotkin. These are some great names. And then you notice that this next page available thing just went from true to false. And that's kind of nice. So the way I built this, I gave myself a little like thing I can be like, oh, is the next page available? And if it's false, then I can sort of skip over it and be like, okay, I'm done. But if you don't have this, if you try to make a request to page 6, you're going to get back empty data. This is sort of like you've now kind of got to the end of the table, and the server is kind of telling you like, you're requesting a range of data that doesn't exist in this table. So I can't really give this back to you. So here's some empty data, have fun. So that tends to be how paging works. Give this a try on your own if you'd like, but you just sort of take that thing I pasted into Slack and just update that number after the page parameter. You can sort of see what I'm seeing here on your own. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay, I'm going to move on then. Okay. So how should you feel about all these principles? I keep emphasizing this because it's really important. Like, REST is some guidelines. In a perfect world, you could use REST. In practice, no one's ever able to follow REST exactly perfectly. It usually ends up being more something where like you build an API that's kind of like REST inspired, or sort of like looks kind of like REST, but there's some exceptions. Not all the endpoints follow those rules. And there's lots of sort of processes that fundamentally like REST just doesn't work very well for. So people try to like fit them into REST, and they sometimes have success and sometimes don't. But I guess really my takeaway for this whole sort of lesson here is like, as an API author, follow the REST principles when you can. And you're going to be an API author soon, but I'm sort of saying this, I guess, kind of both to your future selves and also to one who would write an API that you'd be consuming. Like, it would follow these principles when you can. If you can't, it's fine, but do it intentionally. Like, what would be bad is, at least in my perspective, bad, is building out a whole new paradigm for accessing data that doesn't really think through with like REST-like principles without having a really good reason to do it. Like, if you're going to make deviations from REST, you should have like a good idea why you're doing it, and you shouldn't just be doing it like because you want to. Like, because that's what that's going to mean is the next person who has to look at your code, they're not going to be able to understand it as well because they're not familiar with your approach to solving all these problems. REST is a standard, or as close to a standard as exists. And if it's out there and other people run across it, they're going to understand sort of how the API works. Okay, so this was a really short lesson today because I want to spend most of the day today working through the exercises. And this is going to be the fun part, thing that I think a lot of you have been looking forward to actually communicate with some real APIs. However, first of all, we have some one more contrived careers in code.ml thing, and I've given you some resources to play around with because before we actually like do some real stuff that sort of has like exceptions and breaks rules, I want to give you like a nice sandbox that follows all the principles exactly right, where like you can feel nice and comfortable before having your souls crushed by the real world. So we're gonna do this exercise together. So I'd appreciate if you you all could get Postman up. And we're just sort of going to make some requests and interact with this API through Postman and maybe through Fetch if some folks want to give that a shot, but we're going to start with Postman. Okay, so on my careersinCode.ml server, I've made two resources, students and assignments. The students resource has 3 fields within it. So think of that as like you've got your array of objects, and your object has like 3 keys in each one other than ID. Or you've got your table, and these are sort of the columns in the table. Name, which is sort of the student's name. Current cohort, which is a number, and it's sort of the cohort you're in. For you, it's all going to be 4. And a favorite color, which is sort of whatever color you want. I don't know why it says set this to null for now. I think this is a copy paste error there. So on the right here, I've got an example of a student. So this student has a name, a current cohort, and a favorite color. I've got current cohort and favorite color formatted like this thing called camel case, sort of like JavaScript variables like that. That's one of the ways you can see data formatted in actual APIs. Sort of, again, one of those things up to the actual author. That's sort of just the convention I picked for this example. Within the students resource, there's an assignments resource. So this is a nested resource. And we're not going to get, this is going to be the second part of this. So like, we're going to have a chance to just try some stuff with the regular resource first. But the assignments resource has 2 parameters, the name, or 2 fields. So 2 columns, 2 entries in that array of objects. A name, so the assignment's name, and then a Boolean completed on whether you finished the exercise or not. So down here's an example of what an assignment would look like. So you have the name and object, or name and completed in that object, name the string, completed the Boolean. So there's a bit of there's a bit of preamble to this exercise. So if you want to reference this later on, it's just trying to get the presentation up and sort of keeping us open for reference. Because we got one more slide here. Actually, oh no, we don't. I was able to get it all into one. That's great. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a request to communicate with the student's resource on the API. And we're going to create a student via the student's resource. Now, I want you to notice, I'm giving you a lot less information here than I have in the past. In the past, I've given you like, this is the host name, this is the port, this is the method, these are the headers I want you to send. And I'm starting to sort of like back off a little bit here because this is closer to what you're actually going to see in the real world. Like, you sort of have to read between the lines here a little bit. Like, doesn't say anything about custom headers. So therefore, you probably don't need them. And you're just sort of like making that assumption. And you'd be right in this case, but like there's sort of no headers I said you needed. I'm saying make a create to this resource. So create means post. Like I'm not going to say, and in the documentation, you may not see as much a method. It's just going to be like, oh, you're interacting with this resource. And I also noticed didn't spell out all the fields for you here. Like I didn't give you like an example of the body you have to send. I'm sort of relying on you, or we're going to do this first one together at least, to sort of synthesize what you need to send in the body based on what's on this page. So understanding that when you make a request to a resource in the body, you put the JSON representation of that resource, the object with all the keys and values mapping to what you expect them to be. So let's go through this one together. But if you want to be speedy and give it a try on your own, go for it and see how it lines up what we end up with here together. Okay, so the student's resource, I mentioned on the first slide, this is the careersinCode.ml server. So sort of the same thing we've been talking to here before. So I'm going to start with that. CareersinCode.ml. Okay. So students resource, we talked about that resources tend to use, like the path of the resource tends to be the name of the resource. It's plural. That's the path. So I'm going to go students. Okay. Now create. What method do we use to do a create? That's a post. And you can take a look at the slide earlier on in the presentation. You get a reference for that if you'd like to see. I'm going to pick post over here. Now, we're going to be sending JSON. And it's usually a good practice when you're sending JSON to include a content type header. It also tends to be a good practice to include an accept header to tell the server what you'd like to receive back. So this is not really required for all APIs, but it's not a bad idea. I'm going to give some headers here to tell the server what I'm going to be sending and receiving. Now, you might be wondering, what's the MIME type for JSON? Application/JSON. And you can look that up. If you look up MIME type for JSON, the internet will tell you. But application JSON, I'm going to go accept application JSON. Oops. Not that. That. Okay. Now, the body. So we're making a post request, so we're probably going to have a body involved. And if you remember from before, a create usually means / to the resource plural, the path, the method's post, and the body of the request is the resource you would like to create. So I'm going to go to raw here. You'll actually notice if I select raw, it'll give you like syntax highlighting here, and you can be like, I'd like a syntax highlight as JSON, which is kind of nice. So we're going to type in here our body we'd like to send. So going back over to here, we're creating student. So the student has 3 fields: name, current cohort, and favorite color. So let's give that a try. So I'm going to go name. I'm going to go Ryan G. Ryan G. There we go. Current color. Or sorry, current cohort. Go 4. And favorite color. Ooh, what's my favorite color? Maybe I'm going to be cheeky and go like transparent or something like that. Okay. Cool. So let's click send and see what happens. Hey, that got back a 201. The request has been fulfilled and resulted in a new resource being created. That sounds like a really good status code for this. If we take a look here, you can see we've got name, current color, or current cohort, favorite color, and that ID field. And I'm using this sort of format for my IDs in this API, but it might be different for different APIs. So give that a shot. If you give me a thumbs up in Zoom when you've had success. If you haven't, let me know. We'll work through it again. Actually, one more thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a. So what's cool is because this is a REST thing, I can make a request to students, a get request, and get back a list of everybody who's made one. So I can actually see if you guys did your thing. Anyway.
So this is used for when you want to create a new set of data.
Yes, this is a creation on the resource. We're creating a new student, adding a new row to that table.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like I still have my thing from this morning. Cool. Also, I think I'm noticing some people clicked submit a couple times instead of just one time, or I've got some bugs in my server either way. But there seem to be a couple where there's a few people that have multiples in the list. But
I'm one of them. I just changed the last name. That's it.
yeah, that's fine.
Sorry.
Yeah, me
The-
too.
No big deal. However, though, I did mention in my thing here, keep track of the ID you get back. We're going to use that in the next exercise. So that ID in the response, copy that to your clipboard, put it somewhere safe. We're going to need that for the next one.
Could I see those parameters again?
Uh,
I don't have the assignment one.
yes, here.
Oh, okay. Name.
It's on slide 275, if you want to reference it on your end.
Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Well, I'll keep moving forward if folks are cool with that. If you'd like me to wait, though, more than willing to do more of that too. Unless I hear anything, I'm probably just going to keep moving forward. Okay. So for exercise, the next part of the exercise, exercise 1, I want you to create an assignment on your student. So let me copy my ID here just so I have that for safekeeping. But there's a nested assignments resource within the student's resource. So /students/student ID assignments. And I want you to make an assignment on that nested resource. So, okay, what does this mean? Well, create an assignment. I'm doing create. So that sort of gives me some information. It gave me sort of like a path here, student ID assignments. Okay, that's something. That's something to work with. I know I'm going to be operating on the assignments resource, so I sort of know the format of that assignment. Again, I'm going to have to include some data formatted as assignment in the body. Okay. See if we can figure this out. So I know I got to make a request to careers in code.ml. And it gave me a path, student ID assignments. So go students and then paste. Let's just start with this. Like, let's just get our student back again. So we do careers.code.ml/student/CID. I'm going to be getting that student back from the server, and sort of it lines up with what I submitted before. But I have this nested resource within here, assignments. Go like assignments, like this. See, I get back no data. I get back an empty array. So I'm just like, at this point, I'm just sort of like playing around. Like I know, okay, there's an assignments resource inside of the students. So this is kind of the power of REST. I can sort of like just guess as to what the path would be here. Like I know students, student ID, assignments. I mean, it said it here, but I can sort of intuit that myself as well. But we're creating an assignment. And to create an assignment and make a post, it's a create. That's what C in CRUD means, and that's sort of the method you use for creation. I'm also going to include some headers again, because I'm going to be sending and receiving JSON. So I'm going to go content type application JSON, content type, or sorry, accept, wrong one, accept, and then application JSON. Okay. And then I'm going to go over to the body. So I've entered my headers, I've entered my method, I've entered my URL. And now I need to enter the body. So I need to send, I'm creating an assignment. I need to send the data in an assignment. What does an assignment look like again? Let's take a look. So an assignment has two fields, name and completed. So I'm going to sort of type that out here. So I've got name, say like REST exercises. And then completed, say false. We're not done with the REST exercises yet. Yeah, something kind of like that. Now I'm going to click send. And there we go. We got back a 201. That's a good sign. And we've now, looks like, created a REST exercises thing. Now, one thing I want to call out, we've actually got 4 fields back here. So we have 2, we said, name and completed. We also have ID and student ID. And what you'll see is that this ID here, the student ID, lines up with the ID in your URL. And that's very purposeful. So think of this exercises list as like a large table, a table of all exercises with one column that has student ID, like that's one of the columns in the table. And when you make a request to this and to create a new student, create an assignment, what it's doing behind the scenes is adding a row to that table and sort of adding a column called student ID. And then when I'm requesting the data via students ID assignments, I get to that. I'm sort of returning like a filtered version of that table. So that's how I ended up building this behind the scenes. And it's how a lot of different REST API services will work, where you sort of have like resources often can be like different views upon the same data, sort of accessible from different places. But anyway, give that a shot. I'll give you a few seconds here to give it a try, and give me a thumbs up reaction Zoom if you've had success, and if not, we'll figure it out.
I'm sorry. My Postman went down and I couldn't type anything, so I couldn't see where you were talking about the headers.
Oh yeah, so I just over here in the headers put content type and accept for application JSON, just because I'm sending and receiving JSON. Not a requirement, but a good idea.
Mine body did not show up. Mine is completely different.
You may have to select raw.
I did, and then I put JSON, and it's under JSON. I put the same thing that you have up there, but it it's giving me an down in the bottom where the other body, it's not showing up like that. It just says results is blank.
Make sure your method is post.
Okay, that would be it. Thank you.
Yep.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Once we use the content type, like we used before, the application JSON, it actually gets check mark. So does that mean that it's automatically in our library? So if we do a request, it knows to use that also?
I believe the check mark is there so you can easily disable it quickly. So this is like a Postman feature where sort of you can add and remove headers and like between like run it, remove the header, run it, and sort of like quickly add and remove things. I don't think they'll copy between requests like this.
Okay.
Brandon.
I'm having an issue too. It's saying, like, it's saying cannot post /students and then my ID. But I don't know what's going on. What's the error is because it looks like I followed along pretty exactly.
Okay. Make sure your path is students ID assignments. That assignments thing at the end is pretty important.
Yeah, I'm having that. I mean, would I be able to share my screen?
Yeah, go for it. Oh, at the very end of your box there.
That little like arrow enter thing.
Yeah, I think you've got a new line in that box. If you hit the down arrow key and hit backspace.
It's not letting me. I guess I mean I copied and pasted it from the notes application. Let me like try and re-enter it, I guess.
Okay. Also, another thing is if you just get rid of like the last word assignments in there, like just backspace it and retype it, I wonder if that would do anything. Oh, actually do this. Hit the right arrow key where you are right now. Now hit backspace.
All right,
There we
thank
go.
you. Hold on,
Yeah, I bet if you retype assignments and hit send, it'll work for you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yep. Cool. I'm gonna quickly check back in on the first one to see if anyone else is nice. Ooh, I see some people tried to make so my API is, let's say, relatively dumb. And you can create students that that match the exercise format or the assignment format. It looks like some folks might have done that. I need to remember to add some validations that doesn't work in the future. Cool. So make sure when you're creating your assignment, you got /assignments at the end. If you're just doing post to that, that's not what you want. You want post students ID assignments. Anyway, though, once you've got your assignment created, take your ID for the assignment and copy that. We're going to need that in a second too. So we need our student ID and our assignment ID. And those sort of are going to let us target those particular rows in those tables. Okay, I'm probably going to move on here unless anyone else has any questions. Okay. So I would like you to update the favorite color value on your student to be something else. I'm kind of curious, actually, what did everyone make their favorite colors? Okay, some people also did transparent because they're crazy like me, I guess. Lots of reds, lots of blues, green, blue. Yeah, okay. People are red, green, and blue fans. Interesting. Okay. So update the favorite color value on the student item you created in part A. Update, that's one of the CRUD actions. So that means we need to use a put. It actually kind of says that here too. How was that structured? It was like /resource/ID. So that's how we'd go about updating that particular resource, that particular row in that table. So let's do that. Okay. I'm going to go put careersincode.ml/students. Oh, nice. And it pulled that in for me. Great. That's the right ID, right? Yep, great. Okay, so students ID. So then we want to update that student. I'm going to be sending and receiving JSON again, so I'm going to give it the old content type application JSON and accept application JSON, something kind of like that. And then for the body, I need to send the update I want to make. So let's see, what was my student format here? That's something kind of like this. I'm going to take that. I'm just going to copy that from what I did before. Bring that over here. I'm just going to update this. So get rid of the ID. We don't need that because we have that up there and above. I'm going to make my favorite color something more real. I'm going to like go yellow. No one else had that one. I want to be different. So I'm going to go yellow. Okay, cool. So then I'm going to click send. I got back a 200. So it starts with a 2. That's a good sign. And it looks like my favorite color is now yellow. Now, if I really wanted to test this out, and I kind of do because I want to see, if I come over here and I go find my row, you see favorite color is now yellow when I make the other request. So I'm requesting the whole entire students list here. So that's sort of how I know it worked. I've been able to see it in there, but give that a shot on your end. Try making this request to update this particular resource. And if you had some success, give me a thumbs up in Zoom so I know. And if not, we'll figure it out. Brian.
Just a quick question. It worked, but is it bad practice so when I did my put to update the favorite color, I only made an object with the favorite color and the color.
Yeah.
And it still returned me the full object. I just didn't. Is it better to include everything?
Great question. So this is one of those things that is not standard between APIs. However, the very loose sort of recommendation is that when you make a put, you should include everything. There is another method we haven't talked about that is sort of very similar to put called patch. And if you look in your list here, you'll see it. I don't know if my API, I built it to support it. I don't know if it does. A patch is the same thing as a put, only you can not include, like you can sort of leave out fields that you're not updating. Typically, well, I shouldn't say typically, often the way web APIs are built is they will allow you to like put and patch do the same thing. So if you hook it up that way, like I think I did here, like you could make either types of requests and they could sort of both like be missing the fields, but in very like a strict sort of form, like strictly put, you should be required to include all the fields. Cool. How's this one going, folks? Cool. Seeing a few thumbs up. That's good. Artrell, what's going on?
A question. I was playing a little catch up because I had somebody at the door.
No problem.
So I'm doing the current one, but I'm only getting back, I guess, one row. Is that what I'm supposed to be getting?
That's all you're supposed to get. Yeah. So when you make these
Okay.
requests to target one row, you're only going to get back the row you targeted.
Okay. I was slightly thrown off because I had, students as part of the path, but then I had the ID in there, and that ID was for the other
Yeah.
row. So that's why it's only one, right? Okay.
Yeah. So even though the path is plural,
Right.
like you're only going to get one back when you're making a put or a delete, or I guess delete, you're not getting anything back, or like the get for under students ID. Yeah, you're only going to get back one. The reason why that is because it's sort of the way that REST has been designed is you can sort of read it a little bit like a sentence. And if you try to sort of spell it out, it sort of makes a little bit more grammatical sense if it's plural. But I don't know, just kind of how it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a quick question. So
Sure.
if when we just updated this information, mine showed up as the different information. It's not recreating another one with that information. It's basically keeping the same information and just changing the color.
Correct. And that's what the ID does. That's why the ID is important. So the ID allows you to target that particular row and not to make a new row. If you wanted to make a new row, though, if you got rid of the ID and you swapped your put for a post, you'd make a new row.
And that would override the old row, pretty much. Like they would be connected still.
If you do this request, you're overriding the current row. If you were to make a post, it's going to make a completely unrelated, disconnected row.
Oh, okay.
They'll have like different IDs and different associated assignments and all that sort of thing.
Okay, so it'd be something completely different. Gotcha.
Yep.
Can you look at mine? For Tika V, I was posting and I made a couple of myself or whatever.
Sure.
But then when I updated the color, I just added the row, and I think you were saying something about that while I was trying to fix it. So then I posted again using the current cohort, and I thought it would override the blue. But when I look at it, I tried to get it again, and it still looks like it has. Like maybe I need to get it again.
Well, I'll say I'm sort of looking at let me query this one more time here and look through your data. So, okay, we got blue for you there. We got blue for you there. Got blue. Oh,
Trying to change that one using that ID that
yeah.
is orange to it.
So this is another thing where my API is not all that smart. Normally, if you do something like misspell a field, the API is going to complain. My API just says, okay, and just goes with it. So in this case, like, it looks like you set maybe your favorite color, you did an update, but you misspelled it in the key in your update. So it sort of like stuck it in here as a different thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did it for like when I posted them. I posted it a couple of times because I didn't see it posting, but I wasn't changing to get. That's why I couldn't see. Okay.
Okay.
So then I would be able to delete that made up field from there, right?
Yeah. So if you make another post and the post you make, you get rid of this field, I think it'll go away. There's a chance it won't, though. I forgot how I wrote this. It might not be smart enough to do that. Give it a shot, though.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And if you do have problems, if you want to get rid of it, just make yourself a new row and forget this one ever existed.
Thanks.
Hey, I got a question. So for
Yeah.
this to work properly, you're supposed to update the color but have the same ID.
Yes.
Okay. Can you check mine?
Yeah.
I have a
This
different.
is like
I created a whole other thing then. Maybe
this
I don't
is
know.
really great that I can like take a look at it right here. This is very nice. Are you I think that's Schneider, right?
Yeah, it's my name.
Yes. Okay, sorry. I don't have everyone's thing up at all times.
Okay.
So is this the row you've been working on? Oop, the one that's
Yeah, the
Schneider
one
3?
that says lavender is supposed to be the one that's updated.
Okay. So
And the row above that has purple, and that was the first one I made. Well, whatever that is.
just you got okay, yeah. So you got that one that has so it looks like you've got 2 entries in here that have different IDs right
Okay.
now.
So I
So
did.
it looks like what you might have done, we can sort of dive in further if you want, but it looks like you might have posted twice and not done a put to update that second row or something like that. Or maybe you did you updated one, like maybe you made 2 of them and you updated one successfully and left the other one fine. Because it's hard to tell sort of from this view, but it looks like right now one of your rows has a different color than the other.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that was helpful, but hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. All good.
Okay, cool. I think we've got one more assignment. I'd like to get it done before we take our break here. So I'm going to introduce it now. The last step here is we're going to change the completed Boolean, update the assignment, and change completed to be true. So when I made my assignment, I made completed false. I'm hoping you did too. If you didn't, though, go through it anyway. Maybe flip it the other way. But like, I want you to update the assignment in that nested resource and change that Boolean to the other one around. So, I mean, this is pretty similar to what we just sort of did here. We've got sort of an update here to the students. I want to instead update the assignments. So if I take this request and I stick assignments on the end, and then the assignment ID, because it's like a nested resource, I'm doing an update. That's sort of CRUD with it's the U in CRUD is update, and it goes put / resource name / ID. So I need to grab my assignment ID from over here, or that's my student ID, assignment ID, this one. Do something like this. So put students ID, assignments ID. My headers are still content type, except they're still set to application JSON. I'm going to change my body though. I want this to be like the assignment. It was like a name, I think, and the completed value. That's what it was. Yeah, name and completed. So I'm going to go like name rest exercises, and then completed. I'm going to go true. Okay. So I'm making a put to this path, students ID, assignments ID. I've got content type and accept. I've got my body with these fields in it. I'm going to click send. Okay. Got back at 200. That's a good sign. And we've now updated. Now our assignment has completed in it. So that's good. And if I were to swap this here out for a get and run this again, I have to get rid of the body too, actually. See, completed true. So I know sort of that was saved on the API. I sort of requested it. I read that data for that ID, and I got that back, and we're good. So give that one a shot. Let me know how that goes.
Get that student ID if I don't have it anymore.
Well, you should still have it, but if you don't, you can make yourself a new student. And guess
I have the student ID.
okay.
I have the ID, but the one
Yes.
that says student ID, which was for the assignment that we created.
You don't have the assignment ID anymore.
Yes.
Okay. How about this? Let me look it up for you. So let's find out Alba's assignment ID. So I'm going to find your user here. So your user's here. Okay, that's your user ID. So I'm going to make a request here to students ID assignments. So I'm going to get all of your assignments, and I'm going to click send. It looks like here's your assignment. Here's your assignment ID. I'll send that to you in Slack. So like this sort of stuff is pretty nice.
You only get this. Wait a minute. Are we getting the student ID or just a regular ID?
There's a student ID and an assignment ID both in this. So this is a nested resource. I've got. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was listening.
Oh, I've got this nested resource. I've got sort of students, student ID, and then after that assignments, assignment ID. So the first one is the student ID and the second one is the assignment ID. And what this is saying is it's sort of querying an assignment associated with this student, and then it's getting the ID of the assignment within that assignment collection. So it's sort of filtering you down to sort of that particular assignment. And then I'm updating that particular assignment to have completed true.
Mm.
These nested like resources get kind of confusing.
Yeah.
So it's cool if you're having a bit of trouble with them, and hopefully with time it'll get better. But yeah, this is the fun one. Can I get some thumbs up in Zoom if you've had success? And if you haven't, we'll chat about it, or we can figure it out.
I just noticed that the thumbs up on Zoom now moves. It does a little bit of a movement.
Okay. Well, I think we're about time for our break here. But after the break, we're going to start using the GitHub API, which is going to be exciting. Our first real API service. So let's we'll get into that after the break. Maybe we'll be back at about 7:30 or so. That's sort of what we've been doing here. And we'll spend the whole rest of the class doing this, and then the very end talking about the New York Times project. So have a good break, folks. See you at 7:30. Okay, folks, welcome back. We're going to interact with the real API now. Let's get into it here. So for our first real API, we're going to be interacting with the GitHub API. So I'm pretty sure you folks are familiar with GitHub at least a little bit. It's a place where a lot of open source free code online lives. And the reason why I picked their API is because it's a pretty well built one. It's also something where you all have GitHub accounts, so you all have a way you can generate a token easily. But we're going to do a couple things, ask GitHub a couple questions through their API, get some answers, and then also do some other operations. We're going to create and delete some repositories. So first thing I want to bring all your attention to is the documentation. So I'm going to paste in the channel a link to GitHub's API documentation. We're going to go through this here very roughly. First thing, though, is this is like a very large tome of information, like very large. It is probably unreasonable to read the whole thing. You could if you wanted to, but it's probably unreasonable. There's a nice button here that says Quick Start. We can try clicking on that, and it'll give us maybe some instructions on how we can try to do things. But I'll be honest, this isn't all that helpful. There's some curl instructions. You could try to like follow those. That's the tool you're familiar with. What I think we're going to go through, though, is we're going to just look at some resources. On the left side here on GitHub's documentation, you'll see it says REST API reference. REST API, that's a really good sign. So GitHub implements a REST API. And they've got a bunch of different resources here. Got a lot of resources, in fact. Let's just take a look at one of them. Let's take a look at like issues. I'll click on issues and click on issues on the side here. I'm going to come to this. Okay. Let me paste this in the channel. So this is a bunch of information about a bunch of different requests you can make. So this first one here, list issues assigned to the authenticated user. Notice I got a little curl over here. Remember how I said how like curl is a way that often developers communicate to each other about how requests are made? Well, GitHub's API is no exception to that. They've actually got a curl here you can run that'll execute this request. But let's sort of walk this through. Not like a bunch of documentation, so it tells you what this does. This endpoint lists issues assigned to the authenticated user across all visible repositories, including all the whatever. List issues. So this is like a list or reading data, or it's sort of the R in CRUD. This is sort of that like we've got a resource here called an issue, issues/issues, getting a list of issues. If I take a look here at the response, you'll see I've got an array of objects. It should look kind of familiar to what we were just doing, where like we've got sort of entries in this array of objects, and what GitHub has here is a little bit more nested and complex. But at the end of the day, like it's an array of objects. So like that, where is it here? Oh, I guess they only have one in here. Well, that's not too exciting. But this is all just one sort of large big object in here. Got that ID. So I mentioned how a lot of REST APIs have this ID field that sort of tells you which row in the table you're modifying. Looks like GitHub uses numerical IDs. So their IDs are numbers, or mine were sort of those string values. But either way, it doesn't really matter. They're still unique identifiers per row. And I mean, I've got here on the left a bunch of filters, a bunch of query parameters. So it says, okay, this is sort of like filter. I can pass this query parameter. And by default, it gives me all issues that are assigned. But I could say I want assigned issues, created issues, mentioned issues, subscribed issues. I don't know what this means. Like, I'm just sort of reading this off. But like, just because I know REST, I know, oh, this is probably some sort of notion of like a way I can filter down that list to make it smaller in the data I'm getting back from the server. But I have all these filters here going on. Also, per page. Looks like this data is paginated. So we talked about that too. So it looks like the default page size is 30. The max page size you can set is 100. And we're going to, like, if we just query page 1 by default, we'll get that data and we can sort of go by page. Looks like these are the status codes the endpoint can return. So it can give us back a 200, 304, which is something we didn't talk about, but it's very 200-like. 404, so for some reason it couldn't find the data, like that endpoint didn't exist or something. And then a 422, it looks like that's sort of their catch-all, like 422, it starts with the 4, so it means it was your fault. You didn't send the right data, but validation failed. Some of the data you sent was incorrect or something like that. Okay. So this is sort of very roughly how like decent API documentation tends to be structured. I also should say, like, we got a method up there and a path up there. Like, this is, you have all the information here to make the request you need to make. Except for one thing. We're looking at this curl. Your token, that's missing. Authorizations, this is an authorization header tying into what we did earlier this week. So it's sort of a way that you can tell the server who is behind this request. And it looks like GitHub uses tokens of some sort. They've got the bearer type of authorization, the bearer scheme, and it looks like you need to substitute a token in there. So in order to make this request or any other request on GitHub, we're going to need a token. And that's what I'm going to walk you through next. So this is something that I'd like us to all do together. It should be relatively straightforward to just, so it's just clicking through a form on a web page, but I just want to make sure everyone's able to do it successfully. Now, before I do this, one other quick thing I want to say. I'm saying this more for people who are watching this after the fact, that it's this recorded session. And that's that I'm going to be generating a token for my GitHub account. This token would allow someone, if they got this token, to sort of act on my behalf and do things on my behalf on GitHub. So they could do things like impersonate me or respond to like commit to a repository or lots of different things that would be not so great. So I'm going to be making a token during this. The token that I'm making immediately after this presentation, I'm going to be deleting. And I would say that it's not a bad idea for you to do that either. For me, I'm really cognizant of it because this isn't live streamed, but like I want to make sure that no one's going to try to steal my token and use it for something. Like that would not be good. I've got a lot of stuff in my GitHub account that I really don't want people snooping around on. So in order to make a token, GitHub has this nice little form to do it. I've got I have two-factor auth set up, so I got to type in a little token here for it to let me in. But you probably don't have that set up. Oh, I typed the wrong one in. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take this link and I'm going to paste it into the channel. Visit this link, and this is going to let you create a new personal access token. These are a thing on GitHub that allow you to generate a token you can use for making requests. And we're going to make one to use for today for this exercise. This is sort of as I was talking about, like in the headers day, where we were talking about how you can generate tokens. Like this is an example of sort of the workflow you'd go through to make a token. And if you're interacting with another API service, like one maybe for Capstone, you're probably going to have to do something kind of like this, where you sort of have to give them some information and they'll give you back a token. Now, I mentioned in my presentation sort of exactly what you need to do. The most important thing, you need to give your token the repo scope, REPO. So there's a select scope section here. You need to make sure you check repo. You can leave everything else unchecked. This is the only one we're going to need for today. But the way GitHub works, they've got all these permissions sort of you can set up that give you more access to certain things. And for certain operations, you need to have those permissions enabled. I'm going to put a note here like careers in code cohort 4, something like that. And expiration, I'm just going to 30 days is fine. I'm deleting it after this, so I'm not all that worried. So this is really the most important thing. You got to check that repo. link, check the repo line there, and that'll sort of automatically check everything below it. And then give yourself a little note up top, and then click generate. And once you click generate, you're going to get something like this. It's going to start probably with GHP. You need to take this, you need to copy it to your clipboard and save it somewhere safe, because GitHub is not going to show you this again. It says it even right there. Like, it's generating this token for you. And like, if you refresh your page, it's going to go away. So you need to keep this around. This is going to be an important one for the rest of sort of today. And if you, for some reason, lose this, you can generate a new token. You can visit that link again and sort of let you make a new token. And with that new token, you can sort of do all the same stuff. Like, you can make as many tokens as you want. It's just like this token is what's going to identify you in the API request. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to make myself a new window here of my text editor of choice, and I'm going to paste that in. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, oh, Artrell.
Yeah, can you show that one more time? I'm on the page that says new personal access token, but I missed what I'm supposed to click. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. So let me click on the link here again. So you need to check this repo option here. It says full control of private repositories next to it. This should be the first item in this scopes area. If you check that,
Okay.
it will check everything below it automatically, and that's what you
Right.
want. And then just type whatever sort of note you want in here. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then go down to the bottom and click generate.
Okay. All right, I got it. Thank you.
Cool. Can I get some thumbs up in Slack when folks have generated these? Just want to make sure I'm not leaving anyone behind before we move forward here. Cool. Okay. Now, I think it goes without saying, I said this before, but like this is a secret. Don't share this thing. You don't want to post this like out on the internet. This is actually a common attack vector. People will accidentally post tokens, and there are like programs people have written that sort of scan the internet for tokens. If they find a token, then they'll sort of like store it locally and then use it to sort of exploit things or do things they shouldn't. So it's in general like a bad idea to share these around. So keep it local. Don't put it on the internet. Like, probably goes without saying, but I do want to say it. Okay. Cool. So now that we've got our token. Oh, did someone just ask a question? No? Okay, cool. Now that we've got our token, we can include it when we're making requests. So before we get started on these, let's just try to make this request here. So we've got this curl here. I'm going to take this curl. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard. I'm going to go over to Postman. I'm going to go to File, Import, Raw Text, and paste it. So this is what we did before. We could sort of take a curl, import it into Postman, and use that to sort of do whatever request we want. Hit Continue, go to Import. Okay, cool. So just to say that again, I went to File, Import, went to Raw Text, and pasted my curl and hit Continue.
Curl that was on the page before we generated the token. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, let me post that in Slack too, just for reference.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I'm going to go over to my token here. Oh, not that. I want this one. Too many windows. I'm going to copy this. Go over to Postman. I'm going to go to this header section in here. So sort of the third tab from the left. Go find the authorization header. I'm going to update where it says your token. I'm going to paste my token. And once I've done that, I'm going to click send. It's going to take a second, but we're going to get something back. Got a 200. That's a good sign. Now it looks like I've got a bunch of data here. And it looks like I'm getting some issues from a repository I have at work. I'm seeing some of my coworkers listed in this response here, which is kind of funny. Yeah. Anyway. But like, I don't even really, I mean, I do kind of know what this endpoint does, but like, I don't really have to know what this endpoint does. Like, I've been able to make a query to this without, like, the documentation's good enough, or like, it's just sort of led me through to that process. Like, I've been able to sort of copy things from this documentation here, largely use it as is, substitute my token in the right spot, and the endpoint just kind of worked. That's pretty cool.
So hold on, I'm sorry. So you went to file, import, and then you put the curl under raw text, then you import it again. Went to headers, made a key, authorization, put your token ID, press send, and that's it.
And that's it.
Because I got something completely different. Am I supposed to get something completely different than you?
You will probably, let's put it this way. Did you get a 200 back?
Let's check again.
You probably have a different body than me. My body is probably gonna have more stuff in it because I have a bit more of an active GitHub history than you folks probably do.
No, mine says bed request.
Okay, let's take a look at your screen and see what's going on then.
Okay, let me try to share my screen. Okay, can you see this?
Yep. Okay. So under headers, it looks like you have 2 rows that say authorization.
Oh,
So you've got
does
one
it-
that goes authorization bearer your token, and you've got one that's just authorization your token. You
Okay.
want it to be authorization bearer space then the GHP value.
okay, so authorization bearer
Yep. And usually you want an uppercase B in bearer. Yep.
space, and then put the token in there.
No, less than, yeah. But other than that, yeah. And bearer space your token, and that's it.
Okay.
Give that a shot. Okay, looks like you didn't get anything back, but you did get a successful response.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank
Sweet.
you.
Yep.
So why don't I have anything back?
Well, so I just picked a random endpoint, and I'm not. I have a thought as to why you might not have gotten anything back, but like more abstractly than that, like I just picked a random endpoint. I'm not really like concerned over what I got back. We're just trying to make a request, sort of like do our hello world, make sure we can communicate with GitHub and that things are working.
Okay.
More tactically though, why you didn't get anything back? This endpoint's listing out what are called GitHub issues. Most likely you've just never used them before.
Okay. Probably.
So like your table of issues is empty because you've
Okay.
never added any.
Gotcha.
Or been involved in any. And in hindsight, that might not have been the best endpoint to pick for this example, but
It's okay.
whatever. If you got back at 200, that's the important part though. Then these next ones, we're actually going to have some real data though.
Okay,
And it's
cool.
going to get fun.
So if you get an empty array, you're okay.
If you get an empty array, you're okay. What you should be looking at is that status 200. Make sure that you got that. Or status starts with a 2, but it should be 200. And if you have success, you've made your first request to a third-party API successfully. So nice work. Give you a few more minutes to get this going here before I move on. We'll start actually doing the exercises. Okay, let's go into the exercises here. So you're going to notice these are going to be a lot less explanatory than in the past. These are more like questions. And that's very purposeful because part of the challenge with these exercises is not just like making the request, it's figuring out the request you need to make. And this is like a skill that takes a lot of work to develop and something I want to give you some exposure to now. The idea is you somehow have to like read through this documentation and understand it and figure out what exactly you need to do in order to make these requests, and then make them and answer the question. So the first question is, how many public repositories does the Hack Upstate organization on GitHub have? Well, I did give you a link to the Hack Upstate GitHub organization, and if you're unfamiliar, Hack Upstate, it's they've got a bunch of repositories in here, and you could go through and you could like count all of their public repositories. So you see each of these is a repository. They've got public, public, public. You could count them, but we want to figure it out via the API. Okay. Let's work through this together here. So I'm going to go back over to the documentation. Actually, I'll also paste this into Slack. I'm going to go back over the documentation. So I see sort of there's two sort of like nouny things in this sentence, like repository and organization. And most likely, like I want to query one of those. Like I want to, like if I'm thinking about sort of the query I want to form with REST, like I've got this table. I could have like a table of repositories and I could sort of filter that down to be like all the public repositories and sort of all the repositories that are part of that Hack Upstate organization. So I could like repository list filtered by two things. Maybe I could get it that way. And sort of like the number of rows I get back as the number of repositories. That could be one approach. Another approach, though, is like maybe I can look at like the organization and that'll have some data on it. But let's start with repositories because that's sort of like it's the first one there. And I think I saw repository on the left side here. So if I just like search repository, yeah, repositories right there. Repositories. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of requests you can make to repositories. Okay. Well. Okay, list organization repositories. This looks potentially interesting. Yeah, we could try maybe something like this. Create an organization repository, get a repository, update, delete. Oh, get, update, delete. That's starting to look like CRUD, isn't it? Got update, we got delete, we got those words going there. I'm liking the look of this. Give this one a shot. So get/orgs org repos. So this kind of looks like a nested resource. We've got this resource called orgs. There's like an organization ID maybe here. And then repos is like a list of repositories within the organization. That's kind of starting to get towards what we want maybe. Let's give this one a shot here. So I'm going to take this curl. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard. I'm going to post it in Slack so you all have it. But I'm going to go over into Postman and import that. Okay. And I need to probably put my token. Yep, I got to put my token in the body. So let me get that here. Okay. And let me just like make this request and see what happens. Not found. I got a 404. Okay. Gives me a link. Ooh, that's kind of cool. It gives me a link right to the documentation. So I can actually click on this and it'll link me right back to here, which is kind of cool. That's nice. Let's see if there's like an example here that maybe I can use. Well, I see org. Is there like org or organization in here somewhere? I guess these are organizations. So what about like there's a, we sort of need like the ID for that organization or something. Like we don't have that. I wonder if we could get that somehow. Well, let's take a look at this. There's a, it looks like a lot of these sort of have like like they have some sort of URLs in here that looks like they've got some API, like some IDs in here. Let's see. Well, you see, we're just sort of like looking around here. Like we're sort of like looking around, investigating. There's a bit of exploration here. This isn't just like mechanized, like typing stuff into a box and seeing what happens. Like there's a skill here of like figuring out what you have to do. And this is where we might have to try some things. So like I'm looking at sort of this example here and I'm like, I see name or see ID. Actually, let's try ID. That could work. Let's go over to like here. I don't know what ID that is, but like maybe that'll be something that'll work. Okay, not found. It still didn't work. Let's look at the documentation maybe. Anything here? I'm also curious if I just like look at orgs in here. Do I see anything?
Well, just looking over the documentation, it says that org is required and there's a string. So does that mean that like just any string is required to be for the like to match the org parameter, or does it have to be an org from like that it knows?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good guess. Like it could be that we need to, I guess we're not sure at this point. So this is where we can like try some things and figure it out. Like I see name in here in the response for this. I want to give that a shot, maybe see if that works, because it says organization name. Maybe let's try that. Okay, we got something back now. We got back an empty array and 200. So it feels like we're headed more in the right direction here. We want like a text string and not a number, and that sort of kind of seems to confirm that string right there. So that seems like a good idea. But there's like, I'm looking at this too, and like this thing is returning a list of repos, like a bunch of sort of like entries, like a bunch of repositories. And so this is like a nested resource within an organization. So this is probably a repository, not an organization. So this name probably doesn't really make sense because it's like the repository name. We want like the organization name. And I'm looking through this and I'm sort of guessing like I see owner here. It's not organization, but like that could maybe be it. So we could try like something in here, maybe if there's like a name field in here. It isn't. Okay. I do though see like I saw HTML URL. Yeah. I see this here. This is kind of interesting. Let me try to go to this. Okay, file. And I'm sort of noticing like this has a bunch of repositories, and like if I'm looking at this here, what was the name of this? Hello World. Hello World. Yeah, so like this looks like it's the thing that like the thing's owning the repositories, like it has the repositories associated with it. So if I go to, like I'm seeing that. I kind of want to like, this seems like an interesting lead. I might try some stuff in here. So I see like login, I see node ID, see user, probably not site admin or anything like that. Login seems kind of interesting. It's not name. Let's try login maybe. Not found.
There's a URL for the organization and the repos. I mean, I don't really get what we're looking for, but since we're trying to do plug and play, might as well try it.
Which one is it?
The organization's URL, and then right underneath there's a repos URL. So I don't know. That could be something.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Cool. Let's give that a shot. Okay. That's headed in a good direction here. Now, one thing I'm going to give a hint on, just because we could go down a little bit of a path here. And though I might be feigning ignorance a little bit, I do sort of know roughly the direction we're supposed to be going here. Like, an important thing that with some investigation you might start to learn is that GitHub has sort of a concept of what's called an organization and what's called a user. And they have a lot of shared properties, but actually are slightly different. And it turns out that both can own repositories. So a user can own repositories, or an organization can own repositories. And in this case, like this is a user that has these repositories. What we actually want, remember from the question, is how many repositories does this organization have? So if we want to use this endpoint, we need like data for an organization and not a user. And this is like users, user ID or user identifier organizations. But I think like the thing that I'm also noticing here, like I see this octocat thing all over the place. And if you were a keen observer, you notice this was github.com/octocat. Like this seems to be like some sort of identifier that's used in the API too. And I'm just like, this is just, I'm keeping an eye out, I'm sort of noticing things and trying to connect the dots in my head, but like, I'm trying to speed through this too a little bit, but like this could be a process that could take you a few hours of sort of like trial and error, trying things. It's not something where, especially at the beginning, you're going to have luck on the first shot, unless you sort of know what you're doing or are familiar with the API a little bit. But this octocat thing, like that seems interesting because if we go over to hack upstate, looks like hack upstate's formatted similarly. They got like this hack upstate thing like this. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to, inside of here, maybe put hack upstate. Like, and I'm just like, I'm going out a bit on a limb here. I'm like sort of trying to pick things up, but like, this is an organization. It's sort of an ID from here. It's sort of lined up with the way that the octocat one was structured. It's maybe an interesting lead. We can try that out. Okay. That's sort of interesting. So we got back some data this time. We got back 200 okay. It looks like we've got some data in this here too. Okay. So if we go through this here, like, okay, owner, hack upstate, this is starting to look like a good direction. Hack upstate AT&T NJ. So, ooh, I didn't mean to click on it quite like that. Oh, did I just lose my, I just lost my request. Oh no, I just made a new one. Okay, don't save. I see HTML URL. I want to go to that and see what it is. Okay, it looks like, actually it looks like I committed to this. Hey, how about that? But this looks like it's a repository within hack upstate. That's kind of interesting. Okay. There's a couple other ones here, careersincode.org. See if that's in the list. Yeah, okay. So I want to be clear. I made some guesses here. This wasn't something that I just sort of like figured out. Like it was, there's some trial and error involved though. Yeah, Brian, you got your hand raised. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. So I was just kind of trying to think ahead a little bit. So
Yeah.
I did the GET request for the hack upstate repos. And I found a parameter in there that says visibility public on one of the repos. Is that a way to potentially decipher whether that's a public versus a private repo?
Good call. Let's take a look at the documentation. Is there like a visibility or something query parameter? Oh, there isn't, but type specifies the types of repositories you want returned. Can be one of all public, private, public. That seems interesting. What if we did $type equals public for our filter? So we've got query parameters there. That's a query parameter. Let's give that a shot. But you're right, Brian. Like that's a good lead there. It's just I would expect something like visibility public, but it just says according to the documentation that's not going to work. Got to type instead. Let's give that a shot. Okay. That looks to have given me back data. That's good. Let's count these. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 19. Looks like there's 19 repositories that are public that I'm getting back here. Let's see if that lines up with what I see here. 1, 2, actually, let me, oh, type. These look a lot like these, don't they? It's almost like they're using their API to make that list right there on the page. How about that? I'm going to select public here. 19. Hey, how about that? We got it right. Excellent. Cool. And we could go through and count them, but I trust this total's right. So that's an example of how you might query a real API, a real service, not something contrived I made up. And the big thing is there's a lot of sort of investigatory like work. It's not going to be, you're not going to get straightforward, clear instructions. And that's why I didn't want to start you all off with this, because if you're having trouble making requests in the first place, struggling with figuring out what request to make and making the request is not going to be all that fun. So my hope is by this point, you've got enough basis in making requests where the focus of your time and effort can be on figuring out what request to make. Cool. Has anyone else had success with this? It sounds like Brian had some success, but anybody else?
Can I
Cool.
see the body again? What you put in the body?
It's a GET request, so I didn't put anything in the body.
So then, oh, the headers.
Ah, the headers. I just copied this from the curl from the documentation page. So I had just whatever they included. It looks like they have 3 headers they needed.
Then how did you get the X GitHub in there? Did you type that out? Because I don't know.
I
if
went over to here. I copied this and I imported it into Postman.
All right.
And you can see here that this has that built in already.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I also want to call out, like, because I've used GitHub's API, I'm familiar with what's going on here, but you don't really have to be. Like, you just can think, I just have to send these headers along with my request, like just sort of blindly do it, and that's fine. As long as the request works, it works, you know? If you want to know more, though, there's actually some documentation on, like, in this site that'll sort of walk you through what these headers mean, like why you specify the special accept header and what this special like API version header means. Cool. Well, I do want to give folks time to play around with this, but I also want to keep moving because we're sort of running low on time here. And next one, you're actually going to do something a little more fun, which is you're going to create a repo on GitHub. So I would like you to create a repository called GitHub API test, GitHub-API-test. So let's sort of look at this. We're in this repository thing. Is there like a create repository? Probably is. Let's see, create. So there's a couple options. Create an organization repository. I told you before, the sort of organizations and users are a little different. We want to make a repository for our current user. That's what I said here. Oh, I guess I didn't, but you want to make a repository for your current user. So we don't want to do this one. We don't want an organization repository. That's a little different. And these are sort of the things you start to learn as you work with the API more. You start to learn a bit more of the intricacies about how they model their data and sort of what different things mean and what resources you want to use in what situations and what you want to use in other situations. I'm liking the look, though, of create a repository for the authenticated user. That sounds right to me. Okay. We got a curl here on the left. I'm just going to take this. I'm going to copy this and import this into Postman. I'm also going to come over here and paste that in, just so everyone has a copy of that. Okay, so looking at this request, I'm making a post to /user/repos. Repos, repositories, host to /repos. That sounds a lot like a REST resource to me. It's plural, it's a noun. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. I'm making a new repo. It's following that convention.
Quick question before you move on.
Yeah.
Actually, two questions. When we're making the repository, do you want us to make it with a README?
Oh, when you I'm just gonna say make the repository just with whatever default options you'd like. Doesn't really matter.
Okay. And also, how did you get that curl? Where did you get the curl link that you posted?
Yeah, so I searched for create a repository, just like Command F
On the
search.
left side. Okay.
Yep, and I was on the left side over here. You'll also notice there's some other options. They've got like GitHub CLI, which is a CLI tool they have that lets you make requests. Not really helpful for what we want. They've also got a JavaScript example. So
Oh, nice.
GitHub actually has a JavaScript like SDK library thing you can import. We're not going to use it just because it's a little bit too specific to GitHub for this class, but if you needed to make requests to GitHub, it is an interesting option. We're just going to use the curl because that's what we've talked about.
Okay. I might have to copy. Did you post that on Slack?
I posted it on Slack right here.
Gotcha. I didn't know if you posted on the chat. And I'm like, oh, I don't see it on the chat. Never mind. Let me just stop. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. I'm going to get my token back up over here. And I'm going to paste that in here. Okay. Now notice there's a body it auto-filled out for me. And it did something kind of not great. This is something you have to be aware of with this curl import. Sometimes it'll take some JSON and it'll try to put it in like a different spot. Like it sort of put that in one of these like XWW form URL encoded things. If you see this happen, you probably will. Just take this, like cut it and put it into raw. Like in practice, it'll probably work if it's in the form URL encoded thing, but this is sort of the more technically correct place to put it. So once I have this up here, I sort of have I'm confronted with some JSON. What did I say I needed to do? I said I needed to create a new repository called GitHub API test. That's like its name.
So you're not going to change it from text to JSON? It's supposed to be as text?
Good call. It wouldn't really make a difference. This is just for the syntax highlighting, but yeah, it does make it kind of nicer to read. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to I said, well, I wanted to call it GitHub API test and like name is there. So, and I can look at these fields and maybe get some hints. Yeah, like the name of the repository. There's a lot of options in here. And a lot of these are like optional. We don't have to set them, which is good. Yeah, cool. There's also a lot of status codes here. Wow. So 201 created, 304 is something else we didn't talk about. 400, 401 authorization, 403 forbidden, 404 not found, 422 validation failed. So these are all the sort of same error codes, but just they list them all out here, which is nice. Anyway, oops. I said it was GitHub-API-test. Yeah. So I'm going to go GitHub-API-test. So I've sort of got like this request I put together. I've got a name. I've got these other things too, like description, homepage, all this. I'm just going to leave all this the same. I don't really know what it does, but whatever. I'm just going to go with it. Okay. So got the headers, I got the body, I got the method, I got the URL. Let's go for it. Okay, so I'm going to click send. Okay. So I got back a 201. That's good. I have name GitHub API test, full name, my GitHub username / GitHub API test, owner, that's my username. HTML URL. So yeah, if I like take this HTML URL thing, go to that in a web browser maybe. Yeah, here we go. This is looking exciting. We got a new like repository under my GitHub account. That's good. That's good. Okay. Sweet. So I think I did it. I think I made my GitHub repo. Anyone else have success with that?
I did not. Mine says, mine gave me a 401 unauthorized
Did you
error.
Make sure you put
something.
your token in there if you didn't.
Under authorization and then my token. Okay.
Bearer your token. I mean, you may have it there, but that's just the first thing I would check. If you see a 401 unauthorized, it's usually because
Token.
you messed up your authorization header for some reason.
Okay. Hopefully that works. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. Cool. Anybody else? Good? Not so good? Hi. I'm seeing a few thumbs up. I'm going to keep moving just because we're sort of starting to run low on time here, and I want to have some time to talk about the final project for this week too. So our last, our second to last, I guess we have two more. I didn't realize that. We are going to now rename a repository. So we've got that resource, repos. Let's see if we can rename it to be GitHub API test updated. So GitHub API test to GitHub API test updated. So if I go over to repositories and I look up like maybe update a repository, I saw that above. That sounds like the REST resource, and I want to update it. That could be a good way to approach it. Okay. So it looks like what I do is I sort of specify patched owners / or repos / owner / repo. Okay. Interesting. Well, let's import this curl into Postman. This is a pretty good workflow. It's been working pretty well here. Let's keep doing it. So raw text, paste, import. Okay. Headers. Let's get my token. Copy that over here. Where was it? Okay. Now we've got this owner repo thing going on again. So before we figured out that like owner is that like that's a section in the response. There's like a thing here. And then the repo, just to short circuit this because I want to be short on, I want to get this through here, is that the name is sort of what they often use for that in GitHub's API. So if I were to take a look at the repository I just made here, scan through the JSON I got back, I'm seeing something that says owner, login, my username. I'm seeing name, GitHub API test. So I'm thinking this is the owner, this is the repo. And I'm making a bit of an intelligent guess because I've done this before, but this might take you a little bit of trial and error because like ideally the documentation would be crystal clear on like this parameter from the body is like what this is, or be an ID or something like that. In this case, I mean, GitHub's got pretty good documentation for their API, but it's not perfect. I'm going to give this a shot though. So I'm going to take my username here, jump over to here. I'm going to go there, take the name, copy that. I'm going to jump over here, put that in. So I've now got the owner and the repo hooked up in there. Got my token there. Only thing left, I'm gonna go over to the body. It did this thing again where it's stuck here in the URL form encoded thing. I'm gonna put that into raw instead. Just gonna make it look a little nicer here. Oops, JSON. So what did I say I wanted to do? I said I wanted to rename this from GitHub API test to GitHub API test updated. So I'm gonna take this and copy this and maybe just change the name. Sure, something like that maybe. So I'm making a request to repos, owner, repo, name. I got these headers. I got that body. Let's click send and see what happens. Okay, got back a 200. Starts with a 2. That's a good sign. And it looks like the name says GitHub API test updated. And I bet if I go back over to my thing here and I reload it, hey, it says GitHub API test updated now. That's pretty good.
So you use patched instead of post?
Yeah, I was wondering if someone was going to point that out. So
Yeah, I was just like, what?
if we go over to the documentation, it says it's using patch here.
Uh-huh.
Now, I mentioned this to Brian briefly before, but like patch is sort of another method that sometimes gets used to mean update. There's a slight semantic difference, but it's sort of still like a form of updating. And I would say like you could sort of think of this as like it's an exception from sort of what I showed you, where not everything's going to be exactly lined up with what I showed. And so it's a little bit different, but generally, I mean, you're performing an update. Everything else sort of looks about the same. The only thing that's kind of weird here is like it's instead of it being like repos ID, it's like repos and then like owner/repo is like all one thing. Like owner/repo is like kind of like the ID almost. It's weird. It's got like a slash in it, but conceptually, this sort of acts as like the row in that big table to target, the one that has like this owner and this repo set. But
I guess the gist is they do the same thing more or less.
they do the same thing, yeah. Slight semantic difference, but they roughly do the same thing.
No, I think you kind of mentioned before, like that a difference between patch and put, at least in application, is like patch is better suited for if you're changing just like one specific key or parameter, like in this case, which we're kind of just changing the name. But I guess you could update other stuff too, like so.
Yeah.
But it's I guess this is, or would you say this is encouraged for just more small updates to the?
Yeah, so it's just one of those things where it really depends on the API and what's implemented. But many will implement only put, many will implement only patch, and many will implement both. And when they implement both, usually that means that a put is you have to give it the whole row, like the whole object when you're updating it. And patch usually means you can just give it some of the fields from the object. But it's not super strict. Like different APIs will implement it differently. In fact, at work, one of the APIs we have, put and patch are identical. Like they are literally run the same code. And it's done that way because it's just generally like it's easy to do that because if you include one field, that works. If you include all the fields, that works. And there's not like a conflicting case where like one would do one thing and one would do another thing with the same body. So it ends up working out pretty well that way. And a lot of APIs will do that. Cool. Okay. Oh, Artrell, go for it.
Can you please go back to your Postman for one moment?
Yep. I do want to call out that this is going to be your GitHub username and not mine. If you use
Right.
mine, it's not going to work.
All right, because I got an error. I was trying to figure out where I messed up.
What status code did you get back?
I got a 404.
404. Okay, so that probably means that your path is incorrect. You're sort of requesting something that doesn't exist. Let's take a look at your screen and see what's going on.
All right, hold on 1 second.
That's kind of the nice thing about the status codes. You can sort of use that as sort of a first guess to like where you should focus your time and energy to debug.
All right.
Ah, yes. So you are making a request to repose your username GitHub API test updated. Right now, your your repo is called GitHub API test.
It hasn't been updated yet.
Yeah. So you got the right idea. There we go. Cool.
Boom. All right. Thank you.
No problem. I will say it is sort of encouraging on my end that when you folks are having problems, just something really minor, like that's a great sign. Things are headed in the right direction here. Cool. I had one more GitHub API exercise. I think I'm going to leave that as an exercise to you to play around with, because I want to talk about this end of weekend homework assignment project thing. It's a bit infamous in Careers in Code. It's a project that I think a lot of past students have, I think, generally enjoyed. I haven't heard anything extremely negative about it. So I'm taking that as a positive sign. The New York Times project. So we talked about this a bit earlier on in the class, but the goal is to make a website or make an application in your web browser that makes a request with curl to the New York Times API. And you want to make a request to an endpoint I'm going to sort of direct you at. And that request is going to allow you to get the list, the top 5 books in a bunch of different categories. The New York Times has like these book lists. Most of you are probably aware, if not, I'm telling you now. They've got these book lists. And each list has a number of books on them, and they've got a number of lists. And generally, my goal for you with this assignment is to make a request to this endpoint with the browser, with fetch, get back some data, and then render it to the screen. The idea here is like we're going to be building a little application that allows people to sort of look through the New York Times books and like see what's going on there. And what's cool about this application is if you do it right, like you're actually building a thing that people can get value from. Like this is not a contrived case. This is like a real thing, which is pretty cool. So the kind of minimum thing I'm looking for is something very similar to what we did yesterday with the numbers list exercise, where we made an HTML page, it made a request to an endpoint, you got back some data, you got back the body of it, and you sort of did whatever you wanted with the body. You parse that body, and then you put it into the HTML document. So you sort of just write all that data into the HTML. And what that's going to be is sort of you're going to load the page, and you're just going to see a big page full of JSON. And that's cool. That works. That sort of proves to me, okay, you sort of understand how to show data to the user. But a lot of you are going to be like, that's not good enough. Like, I want to make something that looks cool. Like, I want to make something that looks pretty and uses CSS and all that. And this is where this is kind of cool, because if you're have a little bit more time or want to go a little more above and beyond, you can take that JSON and you can parse it, you can loop through it and do some stuff with it. And the goal would be is to take that JSON and render to the page with some divs and spans and H1s and links and images, and actually make something that looks kind of cool. So I showed this to you before, but I'm going to show it again. Let me show you what my version of this looks like. So I built this a few years back now, but this is what I made mine look like. So you notice when I refresh the page, it sort of starts for a brief moment, there's nothing on the page, and sort of after that moment, like all the books sort of show up. Like it's very brief. Actually, you're probably not going to be able to see it now that I already did it once because it was cached or whatever. Let me reload this here so it takes a second. So, come on, browser, you can do it. Yeah, so you saw there how like it was white for a very brief second, and that's because when this loads, there's nothing on the page. All this HTML in this container here, I'm dynamically creating. So I'm making like a div, and then in that div, I'm putting like an H2 and more divs, and inside of there, I'm putting like some like all this stuff I'm creating from JavaScript. And I've sort of got some JavaScript that's looping through that JSON and making it. And again, this is above and beyond. I'm more putting this out there because there are some folks in the class who are like, ooh, that sounds like a lot of fun. I want to figure that out. And you know who you are. those people know who they are. And if you're not in that group, that's fine. Like just sort of having a div with an idea of something and putting some JSON in that div, that's totally cool. And that would accomplish the task. So I've got this up on Canvas. Hopefully this time I published it right. I had Max look it over and he was like, it looks good, but if I didn't do it right, bug me on Slack and I'll in turn bug Max and we'll figure it out. But let me send you a link to this assignment just so you have it to play around with here. We're going to do part 1 of it right now because we have to to start doing part 1 of it because we have to make API tokens for these New York Times developer APIs. And this process is a little bit poor. Like their GitHub's documentation was like excellent. The New York Times documentation is less than excellent. Luckily, I'm sort of directing you right to the place where you need to go. So there's not too much of searching around you're going to have to do. But let's sort of show you what we're dealing with here. So this is the API endpoint I'd like you to make a request to. Get lists overview.json. So, okay, they give you some things. They give you like this thing here, give you some query parameters you can specify. They give you a little response format here. Nice. They give you some authentication requirements. Okay, cool. Yeah. They even give you a little thing on the side here that you can use to try out the API. You can put some credentials in here and click execute and give it a shot. So I'm going to help you generate a token, this thing you're going to need for this API, but I'm leaving this a very open-ended exercise. Part of the challenge here is figuring out how to make the request. I gave you some hints in here about things you can try out, but I'm not going to tell you like the exact method, the path, the headers, all that sort of stuff. You're going to have to play around with this tool. And it's going to probably take you an hour or two of just messing around with it, trying things, like fooling around. And eventually, you're probably going to figure it out. And if you don't, let me know. We can do like a one-on-one. I can give you some more hints. But the way that you make a token is kind of counterintuitive. Their developer portal is not so great. So I'd like everyone to go through with me right now, just to make sure everyone's got a token, because I don't want folks to get stuck on this later. Like I just want to make sure everyone's got one generated, has it stored safely somewhere, and it is good. So you go over to the upper right and you click sign in that link I sent, and then you go to create an account. So I'll just paste this link directly in Slack, just so you can go directly to it if you want. So you need to fill out this form here. I'm going to make myself a new one, Ryan G test. And then I'll go my email, NY times test, something like that. And then something like that. Okay. So just filling out the form should be pretty straightforward. And click create account. And then I'm going to go find that in my email inbox here. I'm going to stop sharing though, because I don't, gonna go dig it up in my email. Okay, there we go. So I've got this. So I got an email from, looks like no reply at google.com. How nice and ambiguous. And it looks like they have this link here they sent me that I can click on to sort of verify my account. Okay. So I click that. I'm gonna click sign in and try to sign in now. Now, this is where this has gone bad for folks in the past. There's a thing where you sort of try to sign in again and it sort of doesn't work quite right. Oh crap, I got my password wrong. Well, whatever, I'm just gonna sign with my other account then. But you should sign in and you should get something kind of like this. What you might find is in the upper right-hand corner, it still says sign in. If it does, try to reload the page. You might have to try to sign in again. It's a little flaky. Like sometimes you have to sign in a few times before it works. This is sometimes what you have to deal with though. Like I'm giving you a real taste of how it actually is sometimes with these sort of tools. But once you've got in here, actually before I keep moving forward, are folks following along with me here or am I going too fast? Okay. I figured I'm just sort of typing into some web forms and that should be pretty easy to follow along with, but please tell me if that's a bad assumption. Okay, I'm seeing enough thumbs ups where I'm going to keep moving here. It's recorded so folks can watch it afterwards if they need to. So if you go to the upper right-hand corner and you go to apps, this is where you can sort of generate a new token. So in the New York Times developers thing, an app is synonymous with a token. They sort of are like one-to-one. So I'm going to click new app. I'm going to enter a name. I'm going to call it like NY Times cohort 4 or something. Now, there is one important thing. And yes, when you create a token or create an app, you need to select the Books API as the one you want to use. So this Books API here, you need to click Enable next to that. That is really important. If you don't click that, your requests aren't going to work. So make sure you set that up, enable that. But otherwise, sort of I entered my name. I think I can leave the description blank, but like got this form here. So I've got Books API enabled. I'm going to click Save. And I get my key right here. So this is got this key and secret. I'm pretty sure I want the key if I remember right. This is your token. So this is what you want to use when you're making requests to New York Times. And they're going to ask for a token, you want to enter this thing. If for some reason this isn't working, try to delete the app and make a new one. And also make sure this Books API is enabled. I'm going to say it again. If this Books API row is not enabled, your request will not work. So it's very important you have that set checked. Yeah, and that's about it. So with this key, you should be good to sort of go here. I'm going to delete this because I don't want you all to have my key. You need to make your own key.
What's the secret thing about?
I'm not actually sure. I wonder if I read the documentation, if it would tell me though. Let's see. Yeah, it's not uncommon that it just won't say anything. Like, this is not a great API, and like you normally should get documentation, but like, yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry.
What was the
So when I generated my token, there was a thing that said key, or there's a thing that said secret next to it. I'm not sure what that does. I will say that in the past, folks have not needed that to make their request successfully. So you shouldn't need it. But yeah, that's about where I want to leave things. If you, Artrell, go ahead.
All right, I'm at the part where it says new app and it has a list of like APIs. Where do I go to get my token from here?
Yes. So you need to enter a name for your app. Doesn't matter what you pick. And then make sure you under APIs where it says Books API, enable that. So this row, you have to click enable there, and that's really important. And then if you click save, this key here should be your token.
All right, so app name, Books API, click enable.
Books API, click enable. Yep. And then click save.
All right, save. Okay, and then I see the key. All right.
Cool. So that's about where I want to leave things here. If folks have more questions, I'm more than willing to go more into it, but I kind of want to set you loose on this so you can give it a shot. Office hours. So I think the plan has been in the past that office hours are on 5 on Sunday, right? 5 p.m. Is that right? Okay. So we'll keep that up. We'll do that again then this Sunday. I would say if possible, before those office hours, if you're able to make it, give us a shot. Try to work through this. And if you're able to come, I'd love to sort of see who's been successful and who hasn't. And if you're having trouble with it, at the office hours, I'll probably end up doing a bit more of a deeper dive and provide some hints. So if you get a chance to sort of put a little bit of it, put a little work before towards this, like put a little bit of work before the office hours into this, like I can probably help you along a little more if you need it. So cool. Okay, well, that's about it then. And that's the end of the class material. So Max will be back with you with your regularly scheduled classes on Monday. Thanks for having me for these 2 weeks, folks. It's been fun, intense, and exhausting all at the same time.
I'm sure you just saw my message, but I will definitely be contacting you with questions. And I
Yeah.
tried to fight laughing right there.
No problem. Yeah. I should also say, like, I'm not quite as well organized as Max with his like crazy Calendly link or whatever. If you want to set up a one-on-one with me, send me a Slack message. For the next week, my calendar's pretty open outside of 9 to 5 work hours. So like I can make things work whenever. And yeah, more than willing to do that if it'd be helpful.
May we contact you later on for our projects?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I will be in Syracuse for the rest of the year and around. And if there's any sort of meetups, I don't know if there will because it's the holidays, but I'll probably come to them. So maybe see me in person if that. I will try to be back in town for the graduation, but no promises. If not, I'll be attending remotely, but yeah. Cool. Sweet. Well, have a good evening. Have fun with the project. Reach out with any questions and hopefully see you folks sometime soon.
Thank you.
Office hours. Bye.
All right, thank you. Thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah.